Hi, everyone. You're listening to Backstory. Let's hear it on WTBR-FM Pittsfield with Roberta McCulloch-Dews of the Mayor's Office in the city of Pittsfield. Thanks for tuning in. So today we have with us Alisa Costa, founder and CEO of Engage Communities Consulting, which is dedicated to helping organizations build stronger relationships within their communities across cultural divides. So before establishing her business last year, Alisa held the role of Initiative Director for Berkshire Bridges Work in Cities, and that's how many in the Pittsfield and Berkshire community know of her. But prior to moving to the Berkshires, Alisa spent more than 20 years in New York's capital region, working in statewide grassroots and public policy organizations, including the New York Civil Liberties Union, New York AIDS Coalition, Family Planning Advocates, and Hunger Solutions New York. Alisa currently serves on the board for Berkshire Business and Professional Women. So we're going to welcome Alisa. Welcome, Alisa.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here with you.
And I'm so happy to see you in person.
Yes.
We are definitely moving toward a new day. So
fingers crossed, fingers crossed.
That's right. Well, let's get started. I always like to set the stage with some biographical information. So we know that you are not a Pittsfield native. You actually grew up on Long Island, Massapequa to be specific. Mm-hmm. So how was it growing up on Long Island?
I mean, it was matzah pizza. It's the Jews and the Italians.
Okay, is that what they say?
I mean, that's what we call it.
Okay.
If you talk to Jerry Seinfeld is from Massapequa.
Okay.
So that's what we're famous for, or at least we try to do that now.
Okay.
Like Alec Baldwin, but
okay.
Massapequa is actually a very white, middle class community.
Okay.
So Long Island is quite segregated.
Okay.
And growing up, I didn't see a lot of people of color unless I went to the mall.
Roosevelt.
No, actually the Sunrise Mall in Massapequa.
Oh, really?
I could walk there, yeah.
Oh, okay.
But there was clear segregation. Like my junior high school across the street was an all-black community in Amityville, New York, or mostly black, that couldn't go to my school.
Now, when you say couldn't, why not?
Because they were in a different school district.
And okay.
Yeah, so redlining was always really clear. We can talk about that, but really a really privileged upbringing, middle class. My dad was a teacher. My mom stayed at home, and I got to play soccer and be in the choir and all of those things that middle class kids do. And I always had that plan of, I'm going to go to college, I'm going to have a career, I'm going to get married, and all those things. And that's what I did.
All right. So we're going to get into more of your college time later on. But let's talk about how long you've been in Pittsfield for right now. How long has it been?
7 years.
7 years.
Going on 7 years this summer.
All right. And you moved here for the role of Initiative Director.
I actually moved here prior because I fell in love with somebody. I was here before, and I was commuting from here to Albany.
Wow.
Yeah, that's a lot of driving.
That's an intense commute. So if you had to think about the difference between Pittsfield and Albany, what would you say the biggest, because I think they each have their own distinct flavor.
They do. I mean, Albany is the New York State capital, so it has its own thing. It has lots of state workers and lots of advocacy organizations and lobbyists and all of that stuff. You are completely aware of what's going on with state government when you're in the capital region. Okay. It's fairly diverse. And for me, growing up on Long Island, it felt like the suburbs. It didn't feel like a city to me. Okay. Because for me, if you're on Long Island, the city is New York City.
Absolutely.
It's Manhattan.
Yes,
even.
It is.
So I liked it because it was a little bit smaller and more accessible, but and I love politics. So it was just like what I wanted to breathe.
Well, I need to ask, because we're talking about Albany right now, and you went to University of Albany.
Yes, I finished at University. Actually, my freshman year of college, I went to Elmira College.
Did you go to Elmira?
I did for 1 year.
So I lived in Horseheads.
Yes, I know.
Yes.
I know.
And I went to Elmira. I started a year of just my master's studies there. That was before we moved here.
Yeah, so I went from very white Massapequa to even whiter Elmira. And it was such a culture shock. Like, why did I think that was a good idea? I don't know.
Did you do your research?
Well, I thought I did. I didn't think about those things.
Right.
It was like, oh, I like the program.
Right.
The scenery is pretty. And nobody talked to me about culture.
Mm-hmm.
And Elmira College is actually smaller than my high school.
Yeah, it's a very small college, and it's definitely one of those institutions where they're a world unto their own, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
But it created my political awakening.
How so?
Because I did meet more diverse people, and I saw injustice where it was hidden from me mostly, or at least I wasn't aware of it in Massapequa. I became a part of the LGBTQ community there, and just wanting to be supportive and seeing how they were treated. And I understood then that at the college in 1992, you could be kicked out of school for being gay. There was no all-inclusive non-discrimination clause.
Wow.
And so I became aware then of those type of injustices.
Right.
And I also learned it used to be an all-women's college, but there was no longer a full-time women's studies program, and there was no full-time female faculty.
So did you advocate for that?
I did.
What happened?
We were protesting. I was actually on the front page of the Elmira Star-Gazette holding a sign.
I used to work for the Star-Gazette.
I know.
Wow.
And I know, small world.
Small world.
And nothing happened. Except my grades were really bad because I was so politically active.
So then you left?
And my parents were like, we're not paying for this. And I'm like, good, I don't want to be there. And that's what I like to say. I mean, my grades were pretty bad. I left, and I stayed home for a semester, went to SUNY Farmingdale, and then transferred to the University at Albany.
All right, so you had quite the bit of a journey.
I mean, yeah, and I think there are people who do that. They don't do great their first year of college. I changed my major. I changed my major from environmental studies to political science because of that experience.
Well, I think that the major that you switched to, it's fitted for you and the career that you actually embarked on. But you're actually right about that circuitous journey that many of us find ourselves on. I think it's the very rare person that has this very linear journey and says, okay, I'm going to go from A to B to C to D. It doesn't really work like that. I mean, life will hand you a variety of situations and you have to figure it out. And sometimes when you're just starting out with your undergrad career, you're still young.
You don't even know what's
You
out
don't
there.
even know.
I didn't even know political science was a thing.
Exactly. So you sort of need to have those real life experiences to tap into your awakening so that you can say, all right, maybe I may need to do a shift. So, all right, so you shifted into a new realm. Let's get you into Albany. So you're in Albany, right? And it's a vastly different world from Elmira.
It is. And Massapequa. Yes. So
for you, was it, this is what I wanted all my life, or did you find yourself having to find ways to adjust to this new setting?
There was a lot of really uncomfortable things that happened for me but I was always very curious. I actually signed up for an African American Studies course. I wanted to open my horizons. I met low-income folks for really the first time, building relationship with them and hearing their stories, and trying to understand the world more. But I took this African American Studies course, and I was the only white person in the class.
How did it feel?
I was very uncomfortable.
Why?
Because I was afraid of saying the wrong thing. I was afraid of being quote unquote racist, and I was just afraid. And I wound up dropping the class because it was so foreign to me. And I forgot about that for a while. I have to say, you sort of push that out of your mind. You go through the rest of your classes and everything. But that experience stuck with me in many ways as I moved my career forward, deciding to do anti-racist work. learn and break down my biases as much as possible. In my early career, I did some, unpacking the backpack thing of privilege, unpacking privilege and all those things. Really trying to understand why my upbringing was so different from other people.
Did you find that when you were because you would go on after graduating from University of Albany, you would go on to work in a variety of the organizations, that we mentioned at the top of the hour, nonprofits and the like. Did you find that there was an awareness that you had among your colleagues at the time for this work, or was anti-racism and all of that, was that really new for many people?
It was really new. My work at the New York AIDS Coalition was probably the most groundbreaking for me, because there I was advocating on behalf of drug users, sex addicts, trans men and women, all sorts of folks that I had never spent time with. And here I was, this white girl from Massapequa. And I had to forge relationships with people who were extremely different from me and had extremely different experiences. So whether I was, and working for a statewide organization, so being able to have folks in Buffalo and Rochester and Syracuse trust me, but also New York City and Long Island. New York State is very diverse in that.
It is. Everyone always thinks New York is New York City. I'm like,
it is not a monolith.
It is not a monolith. No way.
And so being exposed to very different people and learning that they have real hopes and dreams and experiences, and very similar to mine. They want to live safe, they want to thrive, they want to love, they want to be, they want to feel like they belong places, and they want to be safe and cared for. So being able to experience that, it blew my mind from that Massapequa girl, and it changed me forever.
Did you find that with the work that you were doing that you were the outlier among your friends and your social circle, or did you find that you were in like company?
My social circle was still very white. And middle class, because it's the people in Albany who I was around. I fell in love in college, different man, and stayed with him and married him. So it was all of his friends from Siena College, which is a very different college experience for him. And he was from a very rural town in upstate New York. So it was almost like two separate worlds of my work life and my home life. Right.
Were you able to find a way to blend the two?
I mean, at that point, the lives were, it didn't feel dissonant. It was just work and life. And I didn't think about it as much. Because when you're doing this kind of work, it evolves. Your understanding of who you are and your place in the world and your impact on other people changes over time with that awareness. So I didn't, I was volunteering for an organization in Albany called Citizen Action of New York, and they were doing the anti-racism work in the late 90s, early 2000s. And so I was on their board, and I went through all of these trainings with them, which were just, again, one of those things that just when you open your mind to those things, it changes the way you think about and see the world.
Absolutely. Just thinking about that time frame, I don't think it was a part of the national discourse. We hadn't yet, like, anti-racism was not mainstream. That was not a mainstream term. So I feel like that work was happening in pockets.
It was, and I don't even think we might not have even called it anti-racism in the same way that we talk about it today. I think it was more allyship.
It's interesting. I've been doing a lot of reading books by Bell Hook, and I saw in there, like, she uses the term anti-racism. And I remember thinking, this has been around like for so long, but I feel like it's just been in enclaves like of thought, and it hadn't reached that mainstream discourse where now everyone understands it, whether you are understanding of it in a proactive way or maybe you don't understand it. But I think people know the term anti-racism. So you're doing all this work out in Albany, and then fast forward, you're out here. You're out here in the Berkshires, obviously commuting back and forth. And at some point, without getting too much into the background of that other life, you realize that a shift is required. And but I guess the initiative director role is something that comes to your attention and your awareness, and you think it could be a good fit.
Yeah, it seemed like everything in there was what I am passionate about, what I care about, and where my skill set is. It's this building relationships. You know, when I worked for the New York AIDS Coalition and Family Planning Advocates, two, at the time, very contentious subjects, lobbying in front of a state legislator, somebody who disagrees with you wholeheartedly, and being able to have that conversation. Lobbying legislators who think that that frown upon drug use and LGBTQ communities. Purposely placing myself in situations of powerful people. Yeah. And speaking on behalf of, or trying to give voice to. So and then the grassroots organizing that is involved in trying to create political change. All sort of like, so all these things I did on a statewide level, I could actually practice in a community. Right. In a community, for me, as small as Pittsfield. Like, this could work. Right. And it did. I think so, yeah. And it did. So tell us a little bit, for those who might not be familiar with Berkshire Bridges Work in Cities, as the former initiative director, tell the listeners a little bit about the work that you did, and also some highlights that you've taken away from your experience. Yeah, I mean, I have to say, when I first moved to Pittsfield, I always felt very welcomed. And when I started the position, my first instinct was to reach out to elected officials because that's what I was doing prior. And I remember reaching out to Senator Hines' office in Boston, and Beth Ann called me. I left a voicemail, and Beth Ann called me back, and she said, "Thank you for taking my call." And that kind of to contrast the difference between Albany and Boston, or even Albany and Berkshire County. No one would ever say that to you in a state legislator office in New York State. They would be like, "Kiss my ring first." It's a different vibe. It's a different vibe. Yeah. And there's also, they have a lot more constituents. Right. And I was like, I started that job like 6 years ago today, 5 years ago, 6 years ago today, something like that. And there's a Facebook post where I was like, I just got thanked for answering the phone from a state senator's office. Toto, we're not in New York anymore. Totally different. Totally different. Yeah. I was like, wow, this that made me feel powerful. Right. And so Working Cities is an initiative of the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston. They now call it Working Communities because they're all across New England. Yeah. And it's about figuring out how to help post-industrial cities like Pittsfield and Holyoke and Haverhill and all these places in New England that lost lots of jobs and industry and that have not been able to bounce back. That's right. And they did some research to figure out, well, there were cities that did bounce back. What was it? And they found that it wasn't like the right mix of business and types of education or anything like that. It was basically that all the sectors were aligned toward mostly common goals. Right. So they were all headed in the same direction. And they thought if we could get initiatives going that could help align that and bring people to a common vision for their community, that we could move the needle to become a more thriving community. And for me, when I came to Pittsfield, it seemed that what was missing from that conversation was the voice of everyday people, those that had become disenfranchised over decades, that have been missing from the conversation, because I know from the diversity and trainings and understanding that we thrive more when all voices are heard. Right.
It shifted the model, I would say, because you're absolutely right. Working cities, and for the listeners, I have been a part of working cities from the onset. We were a part of the team that we always joke we would take that van to Boston when we were trying to get the grant from the Boston Fed. And so seeing working cities from the evolution from an idea to the a working concept to where it is today shows the power of our collaboration in this community, and when people put people in the community first. So it's great to see how we have definitely evolved in terms of putting the power back to the people, and it hasn't always been that way, because oftentimes when there is a issue, the gatekeepers come around the table and say, what should we do? How should we help those who are afflicted? Versus, let's talk to the people who are impacted, who would be suffer as a result of whatever issue is at hand, and find out what they think the solution should be. It totally turned the model upside down.
And I'm so grateful for the Federal Reserve Bank for the training and support that they offered, because you didn't as being part of the initiative did not get the extra stuff that really helped us focus. This was not about programs, this was about system change. So when we talk about the greater system, that is naturally the racist systems, the economic class systems in particular that we focused on in the Berkshires, that really make it hard for somebody without that certain level of knowledge, skill. It doesn't mean that you're not smart or that you don't know, but you don't have access.
That's right.
You do not. So if you don't know how to conduct yourself in a city council meeting properly, if you don't know how to jump through the hoops of applying for a particular type of job, or to get a certain loan or whatever it is, like those systems have been put in place to keep people out. And it hasn't been a conscious thing, but that's what it does. And so it's calling attention to that, bringing those voices in, and it got beautifully messy.
That's a great description.
I love that beautiful mess of a vibrant democracy.
Okay, because I was going to ask you to expound on that, and what does beautifully messy mean to you?
Yeah, I think when power structures that have become very comfortable start to become uncomfortable, like me in that African American Studies class, like me in a room of sex workers and people of color, to be open-hearted and listen and learn. And what that means is, yes, we are going to make mistakes. We're going to say the wrong thing. We're going to do something that didn't work the way we expected because of our blind spots, because we are not, in my mind and in someone's mind who has power to change things, we are not everybody's mind and experience, so we can't possibly know what the impact of what we do is going to have. But you bring those different voices in and you try different things that are like, what are you talking about? It changes things. And for me, that was Working Cities Wednesday.
That's right. So I just want a short break. I just want, for those listeners just tuning in, my guest today is Alisa Costa, founder and CEO of Engage Communities Consulting. And we're just talking a little bit about her work in her previous role as initiative director for Working Cities, which has a new name.
Oh, it does?
No. Did you mention working communities?
Oh, yeah, the working communities grant.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
I thought you meant here.
No. But I guess in terms of just broadening its reach, in terms of how the Boston Fed is serving communities across the Commonwealth.
Yes.
But a little bit about Working Cities Wednesday and the impact of that. I remember pre-pandemic, it was phenomenal. It was the whole idea of getting people to the meetings. So the idea of providing childcare, providing food, to make sure that all those potential barriers to people engaging were removed.
And I remember when I first started at the initiative, the Boston Fed gave me access to a consultant, a community engagement consultant, and I said, the residents really aren't participating anymore. I don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
What's your suggestion? And he suggested this format, which I was so uncomfortable with.
Why?
Because I'm the public policy person. I'm used to running a meeting a specific way, and we dive deep into issues that I care about, right? And it was about giving up control to the participants and saying, you set the agenda. And I don't know what you're going to say when you walk in. I don't know what your idea is going to be. And I don't know how much you're going to challenge my power and my understanding of the world. And that's an uncomfortable place to be.
Were you uncomfortable a lot?
To start, yeah.
In the beginning.
Yeah. I was like, I don't know what's going to happen.
Right.
And we opened up so there was a set of rules that were written down, this is how you conduct yourself. This is the flow of the meeting. This, we're going to introduce ourselves. We do not use titles in this space because we're all Pittsfielders, and we are going to. We want to hear your ideas, and then we're going to help you as best we can to make your idea come to reality.
Right.
And we're going to do that because it's not just going to be a bunch of residents with no power, but the people who can make those changes also need to be in the room.
Right. It was a great mix.
And so what would happen is someone would say, I want to help create a youth program because my kids don't have stuff to do.
Right.
And in the room is the United Way and the Girls Incorporated, and they sit down with that person once they pitch their idea and let them know about resources that are available and things like that.
Right.
So all of a sudden I was like, oh. And word got out pretty quickly that this was a very different space.
Yeah.
And not only did residents want to be there because they had ideas to pitch, but community leaders wanted to be there because they were like, oh, this is where the people are.
Right.
Because it had been really hard prior to get people to participate in community meetings.
Right.
And that's because historically, we don't like to think about this, but they showed up, they said what they needed to say, and you didn't listen because you had a preconceived idea of what needed to happen.
Right.
And so we had to cut that not cut it, but change that process of thinking.
Right.
And that is a system.
Right.
And so holding meetings like that changes the system.
Right. Absolutely. You're right. I mean, when you think about that systems change, people don't necessarily think about when there are issues, they don't necessarily go to the systems. Again, if that requires deeper thought and deeper analysis.
And a lot more work.
Right. And oftentimes you have to also break apart systems and rebuild.
And I think that was the hardest part, the system piece of the work, because what it was saying is you may have this program, but the way you are delivering it does not work. And, well, what am I supposed to do as an organization? I have a grant. I said I was going to do it this way.
Right.
The grant is requiring I do it this way. So what do I do to even start to change that? Because it changes your whole perception of what your role is as an organization or as a city.
Right. To
say, this is the way it's supposed to be done. And it's really hard to break out of those comfortable thought patterns.
Yeah, it has to. In the first step toward change requires that there's something wrong, because you have to admit or acknowledge that the system or whatever is at work is not working. And that, I have found, is the most challenging piece of this work, is the acknowledgement, because before the system can even be dismantled, there needs to be an acknowledgement. And for some, there is a total lack of understanding that there even is a system. That, you see what I'm saying? Like, to even get to that point requires a deeper level of thought and analysis that not everyone has arrived at.
And this is why I love another podcaster, Brene Brown, because she talks about vulnerability. And I actually started listening to her podcast, Dare to Lead, after I left my position. And I was like, oh, this is what we were doing. It was about being vulnerable is okay. And that I feel like that's what I do. I step out, I say I've learned to say I'm uncomfortable. I've learned to know to acknowledge my discomfort and try to understand why I feel uncomfortable. Why do I feel hurt when somebody says you did me wrong? Because that wasn't my intent. And really look into that space, because it's in the discomfort where we grow and where we learn. And where I've put myself in those types of positions my entire adult life, that is still, I need to help acknowledge that for anybody, that is really hard.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's in that gray space that that we learn, that we realize what is at hand here, but it's uncomfortable and it's awkward and it doesn't feel good. No. And so oftentimes as individuals, we want to run away from that discomfort any way that we can, whether by not acknowledging it or quickly moving past it, because it requires that level of vulnerability, like you said. And I think that's a perfect segue just in terms of that vulnerability that you talk about and the shift that you made to establishing your own business once you left the initiative director role, which you contributed so many good things to our community, and you have been able to build so many strong collaborations and partnerships with people in the city of Pittsfield, and you decided to shift. And I think to your point, even when we initiate change in and of itself is an uncomfortable thing because it comes with its own set of baggage. So tell me a little bit about that shift to establishing your own business and how you came to select that name for your organization. Yeah.
I was. I want to acknowledge that the work that I did with Berkshire Bridges Working Cities was my favorite job ever. It was also the hardest, and because of that, it was really emotionally challenging. And then COVID hit. Yeah. And so I did a year of COVID, and I didn't know how to do community engagement over Zoom. Yeah. I didn't know, that was just beyond me. And on top of that, I was caring for my mom, and I lost my mom in 2020 as well. And I recognized that my mental health was not good. And so I chose, I was privileged to be able to leave and say, I can't do this, I need to rest. Right. And I did. I rested for 6 months. I poked my head in here and there and tried to keep up a little bit, but I realized, nope, I gotta back up. Right. And in that process, I started to think about, well, what will I do next? And I realized, or I decided for myself that working for someone else was going to be filled with conflict, probably, or that's what I imagined, because I'm going to walk into an organization and want to change the system. As soon as I go in, I'm going to be and that's a terrible place to start off at any organization.
So let me just tell you what's wrong here.
Right? Because I had built up a lot of frustration with systems because of seeing the barriers that people in our community and communities across the country face, and going, gosh, I don't know. But also I was hearing from other folks that they wished they could have somebody they could hire someone like me to do community engagement, because they were impressed by the community engagement that we were able to do there.
Right.
But they couldn't afford that for a full-time position.
Right.
And then the Federal Reserve Bank reached out to me and said, "Will you help us support the other communities that are getting this grant in Vermont and Maine?
Yeah.
Because we think you have valuable insight for them, and we'll pay you."
Yeah.
And I said, "Really?"
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Sure.
And I realized, I can still do this work that I love and do it for a bunch of different organizations.
So that was your aha moment.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And so I sat with that for a while. And then I talked with Deborah Gallant at E4All. I'm like, "Hey, I'm thinking of starting my own business. Like, I don't know what to do."
Yeah.
And she said, join our program. Of course she said that.
Right.
And I was like, it couldn't hurt.
Yeah.
And so I did. So at the same time of sort of starting to do work, I went through the E4All program to learn how to run a business, so I don't, destroy my credit or anything like that.
Right. We don't want that.
No.
Okay.
And also, gain some connections. But so I did that in the second half of 2021.
And the name, how did you settle on the name?
I had a really hard time naming the organization.
Yeah.
And then I just decided I'm about engaging communities.
Yeah.
But I had to be really careful, because engaged sounded like engagement services, weddings. But I'm going to make it work anyway.
Right. Well, I think, thinking about the name, thinking about your background, everything that you've done, I feel like it's actually really fitting. It sums up perfectly the work that you've done and the work that you propose to do. For our listeners just tuning in, my guest today is Alisa Costa, founder and CEO of Engage Communities Consulting. And we're just talking a little bit about just her business and how she settled on the name. But also, Alisa, tell us what you hope to achieve with the work that you are doing.
Yeah, thank you. I think organizations are constantly trying to work within communities, nonprofits, cities, towns, and even businesses. And a lot of times we don't even realize as organizations the mistakes that we're making to lose trust in our community. And what we see from that is a lack of engagement in community practices and processes. It becomes a smaller and smaller group of folks who are making decisions, and that's when everything kind of doesn't work. So how do we prevent that? We have to have those relationships. And those relationships need to be authentic.
Right.
And in order to do that, we need to be uncomfortable and vulnerable.
Right.
And how can I, in my experience, help organizations do that?
Right.
And because it is not easy.
Right.
And nobody is perfect at it, right? So all of this stuff that I do, I never claim to say, I am the expert on anti-racism or community engagement. It's here's a process and a practice that you can go through. Here's a way of understanding the world and your constituencies to build a relationship so that when there is conflict, you can address it instead of ignoring it. Because you're comfortable saying, ooh, something isn't right there.
Right.
And what can we do together?
So we've spoken, Alisa, in our informal conversations, and I'm a Black woman, you're a white woman, and we've talked about allyship, and we've talked about the different perspectives that, especially coming to this work, that we each bring. And I think you offer a unique perspective. You're able to have conversations with individuals who may come from the same background as you, who may not even have an awareness, a glimmer of what is this even about? What is happening right now? And
what are you talking about? What is that word?
Exactly. And you're able to bring that unique perspective because of your lived experience. I think that's so important. As individuals, we all come to the table with our lived experience, and there are people that you're able to provide an awakening to, or even, give some food for thought. because they are able to say, oh, well, she went through, we have similar backgrounds or something like that. So I think that there is value in this deeply complex work, and you bring a really important perspective to it.
Thank you. I think this I'm focusing a lot on the word practice, because it is a constant. It's like playing an instrument,
yes,
or playing a sport.
Yes,
you are never going to do it perfectly,
right?
But you are going to make a mistake, pick yourself up, and keep trying, because that is, for me, this work as a person of privilege. And I don't have all privilege.
Right.
I still have identities that oppress me.
Right.
But privilege in that I am middle class. I have a stable and supportive family, and I have had experiences that have given me those aha moments, and I can share those, right, and say, if you ever wondered about this, why this bothers you about somebody else, it's because of what you have been socialized to believe. And we, in order to create a just community, and I believe that the work of our community is the most important, especially in these very scary moments that or lives that we're living now, that the work of community is the most important, because if we can forge relationships with the people around us, we
right,
prevent some of that conflict from getting into our community.
Right.
So that practice of trying to understand and trying to learn and being open and screwing up and realizing you screwed up and feeling that pain, but saying that is mine to hold.
Right.
I've harmed you, kind of thing. Like, all of that is a practice.
Right.
And nobody is perfect at it, but we have to move the ball down the field. We may not get to the goal,
right,
in our lifetime,
right,
but we have that journey, and it sucks.
Yeah. Listen, I think that each of us, you're absolutely right about the whole lifetime thing, because I feel like each of us, each generation, we have our own assignment.
Yeah.
And I don't think that the job will be totally done or complete, to be honest, because if we look back to even let's just look at the Civil Rights Movement. I mean, let's look at the Voting Rights Act of 1965. I mean, that's 1965, right?
Yeah.
And so that's not a far ways off. And, so we have a lot of work to do, but I feel like each of us, we have our assignment and we have to complete it. And then we pass the baton to the next generation, and then they have their specific assignment, and then they'll do their work. And I think, cumulatively speaking, all of it will help to continue to move that needle toward change that we're seeking as a society. But I want to backtrack a little bit, because you mentioned the word privilege, and I think that oftentimes there's a lot of confusion around that word. So could you just explain what that means? Because a lot of times people think, well, I'm not rich. What are you talking about, privilege? I don't have a ton of money, and so explain that.
Yeah, and I realized it as I was saying it. It was privilege and then oppress. And so we all, because of our identities, are either seen by the world in one way or another. And because of the way we're seen and the way the systems are set up, there are barriers that some people have that we don't have because of those identities. So because I am white, because I am middle class, I have certain things I didn't have to overcome in my life. I didn't have to worry about my finances and take 3 jobs. I didn't have I'm very privileged that I did not have huge college loans, and I was able to pay those off. Most people cannot. I am very privileged because I could live in safe neighborhoods where I didn't have to worry about my safety and all of those things. That doesn't mean that I didn't work hard and I didn't have struggles, because I'm still a woman in a man's world. I'm still paid less than men in my positions. I still have to deal with the threat of sexual assault, or deal with the issues of being treated differently by elected officials when I lobby them, and all of those things. The world is complex. We are simultaneously privileged and oppressed.
Right.
And that is really hard for people to hold.
Yeah.
Like, our world is that complex. We can be sad about one thing
right.
at the same time as being happy about another thing.
Right.
And we were not taught to think that way and
right.
to hold conflicting thoughts.
Right.
And I think that's why privilege and oppression are so difficult for people to understand.
Right.
And that's just from my perspective. So there may be somebody who is white but also economically underprivileged.
I was going to mention that exactly.
And that is a whole other level of challenge in your life.
Yeah.
But you didn't have to also be black
right.
and deal with the challenges of being black in our
right.
world.
Right. I think that's an important point that you made, because I often sum up privilege as the benefit of the doubt. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't necessarily take into account your economic status. There is a benefit of the doubt that is attributed regardless.
Yeah.
And so it's that benefit of the doubt that that affords perhaps access to different things. Again, not taking into consideration other factors, but just on the surface level. Mm-hmm. So privilege is a very complex thing to understand, but I think if individuals choose to learn more about it, they can understand how it even came to be, because nothing in our country just happens, right? It's always connected to our history, and it's always connected to our structures and our social hierarchy and things like that. And I think it blows people's minds even when you talk about race and say, wait, hold on, race is a social construct. It's not even real. But
I was just going to say, there's a secret. It's all made up.
It's all made up.
We make up everything.
It's not real. It's like the only real thing is that we're human beings.
Isn't that weird? I
right.
think I'm here. Yeah.
We're both here. We're both human. We look different, but those are like surface things. But we both are human beings, and that is our connective tissue as people who populate this thing we call Earth. We are alive, and we have these great, glorious experiences that allow us to experience life here. And it's all the other things that we create among ourselves to create this, situation that we find ourselves in.
Yeah.
So,
So I appreciate you asking that. And of course, it's so complex that it took me so long to talk about it. Like, am I ever going to stop talking?
It's okay. Oh, goodness. So for those listeners who are just tuning in, my guest today is Alisa Costa. She is founder and CEO of Engage Communities Consulting. And we're just having a really spirited discussion right now on just building relationships and acknowledging barriers sometimes to those relationships within our communities. So I think the work that you're doing is hugely important for, we're 3 months into 2022. Aside from your business, do you have any other goals that you have set your sights on?
I'd love to go on vacation.
Oh, where?
Anywhere. No, I really want to focus on my business in a way that it's, starting a consulting business is kind of more. It's different than starting a brick and mortar business. Mm-hmm. It's not like you get customers rolling in or something. The projects kind of start and stop, and so I'm sort of through that learning process, and also the learning process of, is this what I want to offer? How can I make it better? Mm-hmm. Is there what? So it's being comfortable with that learning process and being like, oh, that didn't go so well. Yeah. And so I'm grateful that the organizations I've been working with are learning with me and realize that I want to make this work better. Right. And part of this, so through the Working Cities Berkshire Bridges, I was doing the Bridges Out of Poverty workshops, and that really focused on our differences in culture around economic class. Yep. And economic class almost exclusively.
Yeah.
And one of the hardest things for me personally in offering that is after the George Floyd incident and Black Lives Matter, it just felt tone deaf. To me, to only be talking about economic class when we talk about cultural differences. It's a valuable segue for people who are really uncomfortable talking about race to start thinking about the economic class as a culture and those differences.
The intersection, right.
And they intersect pretty closely. And it really helps to open people up to that. So I want to take what I've learned from the Bridges Out of Poverty model and build in those intersections.
Right.
So, there are challenges in understanding related to economic class, and then if you add in race, LGBTQ status, disability, or anything like that, like what those extra challenges on top of that. And I think I just did my first workshop for that, and I think it's working out pretty well. So
I think to your point where you do the work and then you have the analysis and you think about, okay, what worked really well here, what didn't, and getting that feedback too. I mean, and I think the good thing about it is it's not full stop, period, work is done. This is
never done.
This is ongoing work where the wheels are constantly in motion. So you're always going to be in a state of analysis, always going to be thinking about what was that input, how can I, make this better. And I think that you are so ahead of the curve because you have accepted the uncomfortability of this work. That the fact is that it's part and parcel of it. You're never going to feel like, oh wow, this feels great,
perfect,
right?
Done, period.
Right, like that was awesome. Like, no, you're going to feel like, woo. Wow, that was a session.
That didn't land the way I expected it to.
And that's okay.
Yes.
Right.
So and also to understand, like, our emotional reactions are just what they are, emotional reactions, right? So I do an exercise in a workshop and somebody is not happy with it, right? And they're like, I don't understand why you're asking me to do this. Like, this doesn't work at all.
Yeah.
And you think, oh, maybe I shouldn't have done that. And then I'm like, and then I have to and I have that reaction, that defensive reaction that we get when and then it's like, wait, that's okay. It's the thought process is not for everyone. Not everyone learns the same. Yeah. I am not going to make, if I have a workshop with 50 people, all 50 people are not going to be happy. Right. And not going to feel like they learned something. Right. And that's okay. Because it's never going to be perfect. It's not meant for everyone. Not everyone is open to receive. Right. I cannot communicate perfectly to everyone, but it goes back to that messy relationship building. Yeah. You're going to have a moment where you say something or do something and that person is not happy with you. Yeah. Yeah. And you have two choices. You can let it eat you up. Yep. Or you can be like, analyze it, look at it. Oh, it made me feel this way. Okay. Interesting that I felt that way, but that I'm going to let that go and just move. I have to move forward. Right. You cannot allow that moment to distract you from the group that's waiting to receive that information, and you have to almost like let that person go and say, okay, it's fine. You're entitled to feel the way that you feel. It's okay. And when that person wants to come around, whenever that time is, that seed that you've planted is there. So at least they'll have some point of reference to be able to say, well, I kind of did hear a little bit about this. Let me look into it. That's if they get to that point of awakening. Some people might never. But you know what, though? If, again, I always look back to, again, the people who have come before. And if they were dissuaded by the naysayers, and at the time of folks who were deeply entrenched in civil rights work, when the whole system, we're not even talking one or two individuals, when a whole system was completely
against you, then where did they find that optimism to say, well, we still believe in voting rights for all people, and other rights and fair housing and fair employment and all those things. And they had to not focus on who wasn't with them, but focus on who is with them. And so I think that's an important component of your work. I see our time is whittling down, so I would be remiss if I didn't ask you, with all this complex work that you're doing, what do you do to unwind and settle your mind?
I love to cook and I love to play music.
Nice.
And sing. I cook a lot, but I learned to play bass guitar a few years ago because my partner Ted plays guitar, and I was like, I want to get in on this.
Okay.
And so I learned bass guitar so I could do some basic jam sessions.
All right.
And it is fun. We have a studio downstairs Ted built on his own, and we go down there.
Wait. Was this a pandemic-built studio or?
No. I met him, and he was like, I'm going to build a studio. I'm like, yeah, okay.
And he did?
He built the studio.
Oh. Does it look like a studio?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, it's got a control room and everything.
Fancy.
It is very fancy.
Oh.
And so I have to get serious when I get down there with my bass guitar. Dum, 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 dum.
You're like, this is for real.
Yes. And, one day I'll get back to throwing parties where I get to do both.
You used to love to throw parties.
I love parties.
I know you did.
Yeah.
One day. All right. So we're down to about 2 minutes, but I'm going to ask you two last questions. Who or what inspires you?
Oh, gosh. So many people inspire me when I see somebody in our community or friends struggle and overcome something. I'm like, oh, how did they do that? Like, that is just super inspiring to me.
Okay.
The strength of human beings is amazing.
I concur. And if you had to choose one word to describe yourself, what would that be?
I really like to say brave.
Okay.
And bravery is not about not being afraid. It's doing something even though you are afraid.
That's right.
And I am afraid all the time.
I'm afraid right now.
And I do it anyway.
Yeah, good for you.
I have values and it's just important to me.
Good for you, Alisa. Oh, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for being vulnerable in this conversation and sharing more about your work. And if folks want to learn more about you, where can they go?
Oh, I wish I had a website. I'm still too new, but you can find me on LinkedIn.
Okay.
Alisa Costa and Engaged Communities Consulting. I'm also very active on Facebook and Instagram, believe it or not.
All right. Well, check your DMs. All right. So, everyone, you've been listening to Backstory. Let's hear it on WTBR-FM Pittsfield with Roberta McCulloch-Dews of the Mayor's Office in the city of Pittsfield. Thanks, everyone, for listening, and have a great day.